I've been a semi-truck driver for 9 years, and during that time, I've seen some crazy things that most people wouldn't believe. But you know what they say, nothing can prepare you for the future. I found that out the hard way on a cold December evening. I had been driving all day, from Seattle, Washington to Boise, Idaho. This was one of my regular routes, and it felt like the miles just flew by. But near the end of my shift, I felt the exhaustion creeping in, and I decided to pull into a rest stop near the Snake River Canyon just off the I-84 freeway. I never took any chances with rest stops, so I parked my rig at the far end of the parking lot, making sure there were plenty of other vehicles between mine and any potential hazards. I put the parking brakes on, grabbed my flashlight, and hopped out of the cab to make my way toward the rest stop bathrooms. As I was walking, I noticed a woman standing in the shadows on the edge of the parking lot. She looked disheveled and frantic, and it was clear that something was wrong. I assumed that she was just a homeless person that had taken shelter for the night, but as I got closer, she rushed forward towards me. "Please," she pleaded, "I need your help. My husband just called in and he's been having chest pains. I need to get to the hospital." The look of fear in her eyes was enough to make my blood run cold. I hesitated, but I could tell the woman was desperate, and I couldn't just abandon her and leave her stranded. I reluctantly agreed, and we climbed into the cab of my truck. I asked her a few questions to get some information about her husband and his condition. She said her name was Claire and her husband's name was Eric. She added that he was also having trouble breathing and was complaining of dizziness. He told her it was getting worse by the minute, so we had to get there quickly. We drove in silence as my mind was spinning. I navigated the winding roads and made my way toward the hospital. I had a million questions running through my head, but now wasn't the time to ask them. Finally, when we reached the hospital, I pulled up to the emergency room drop-off zone. Before I could say anything, she was already out of the door and sprinting towards the entrance. I put the truck in park and got out to follow her. My heart was pounding so hard. When I reached the entrance, she was nowhere to be seen. I frantically searched the lobby and the hallway, but there was no sign of her. I asked the lady at the reception desk if she saw where she went, and she led me to the room. When we got to the hallway, I spotted Claire slouched on the ground against the wall. Eric was dead. After a few moments of silence, I finally mustered the courage to ask Claire what had happened, but she was too grief-stricken to answer. I offered to drive her back to the rest stop, but all she mumbled was, "No, I want to go home with Eric." I was heartbroken to hear that, and ended up convincing Claire to let me drive her back to the rest stop, despite her utter shock. When we were almost there, I finally worked up the courage to ask her more about what happened before I showed up. Everything she was saying sounded absolutely devastating, until she broke down and confessed something horrible to me. In tears, she said, "We had a terrible argument earlier, and I slipped something into his drink." My mouth dropped open in shock, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We drove the rest of the way in silence, and the only sound was the steady hum of the engine. When we finally arrived at the rest stop, Claire got out and slowly walked away. I watched her as she disappeared back into the rest stop. After collecting myself and taking a few deep breaths, I called the police. I guess I learned a pretty tough lesson that night. No matter how much experience you have in life, you never know what the future can hold. It had been nearly 12 years since I had taken over the family freight company. As November settled, it was really starting to feel like winter. The sun was setting earlier and earlier, and the temperature was steadily dropping. Little did I know, the darkest of days were still to come. It was around 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I was just about ready to close up shop for the night when I heard my cell phone vibrate. I glanced at the caller ID and noticed it was one of my drivers, Pat. He usually stayed out late on the roads delivering goods, but this call was odd. He's been with me for 7 years and has not once called me outside of our routine check-ins. I answered the phone, instantly noticing the panic in his heavy voice. He said he was being followed. Immediately, my heart dropped and my stomach churned. I didn't understand how he could be so sure someone was following him. I didn't want to doubt him though, given that he's always been extremely reliable and reasonable. Pat didn't give any more information. All he said after that was that he was scared and needed help. There wasn't much I could do in that situation, so I told him to get off the highway and call the police. I told him to drive somewhere where other people were around so he wouldn't be completely alone. He kept asking me questions, but I had no idea how to answer them. All I said was to keep the cab doors locked and to call me back once he was safe. I waited anxiously for him to call back, but the minutes felt like hours. After what felt like an eternity, Pat finally called back, but he sounded different this time. He said he had pulled over at a rest stop off the side of the highway and was safe. I asked him if he could see anyone around, but he said it was too dark and said that he got worked up over nothing. I felt bad for him, obviously sensing the embarrassment in his voice. A small part of me also felt like there was a chance he could be in real danger. He'd been working a lot of overtime and was probably exhausted, which made it unsafe for him to be on the road. Since he wasn't far, I told him to stay put and that I was coming to pick him up. I also gave him a list of nearby towns and roads, so he could move in case he was in danger. I also informed him to call the police with any sighting of suspicious activity, just to be safe. I sprang into action and started driving towards Pat. I had mapped out the quickest route to the rest stop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. As I drove, I noticed how lifeless the highway had become. There were no headlights in sight, just me and the road. After about 30 minutes, I finally arrived at the rest stop. I drove to the entrance, only to find Pat's truck abandoned on the side of the road, maybe 50 yards ahead of the rest stop. The doors were left wide open, and the headlights were still on. My heart sank, and I bolted out of my car towards the truck. He was gone. I literally felt like I was living in a nightmare. I desperately screamed his name, but the expected silent response brought tears to my eyes. I called the police, trying my best to form proper sentences, but they knew exactly what I was talking about when they heard me mention Pat's name. He had already called just minutes before, and told him that a car had been following him for the past hour and had just pulled into an abandoned rest stop where he was parked. The dispatcher told him to drive away, and he did, before he began screaming out of fear. Between his screams of terror, his last words were, "I'm gonna die," and then the phone hung up. Forensics searched the cab for any fingerprints or foul play, but it was completely clean. My heart goes out to his wife and baby boy, who will most likely never see or speak to him again. The guilt I feel each and every day is immeasurable. Had I just driven a bit faster, or left a minute sooner, I may have been able to save him from his awful fate. And to my dear friend, Pat, whether you're dead or alive, I hope you're in a better place and at peace. It had been a long night. I'd just finished my drop-off in Nebraska. However, this was only the halfway point. I still had to drive all the way back to Minnesota, and I was hoping to be home by the morning. But then, almost out of nowhere, the snow started. After just listening to the forecast earlier, it took me by surprise. It didn't take long for the lightly falling snow to turn into full-out blizzard conditions. I saw other vehicles driving in the opposite direction start to pull over, so I decided it was foolish to continue for much longer. I eventually stopped in South Dakota, just off the interstate near Rockerville. My truck started making weird noises, so I pulled over onto the side of the road, hugging the shoulder as tightly as possible so I wouldn't get hit by another car. Now, I'm no rookie trucker. I'm 36 now, and I've been doing this since I was 22. In the case of something happening like this, I stocked my trailer with extra supplies. I got out of the cab, instantly being blasted in the face by the tornado of snow, and quickly retrieved a few blankets and some other small supplies before getting back into the cab. I switched my CB radio on, hoping to hear something that might give me a bit of information on the weather, but all I got was static. I was starting to get a bit concerned, so I popped the hood of the truck to take a look at the engine. I quickly discovered the problem. The fan belt was snapped in two. I figured my best bet would be to call for a tow truck to come and grab me, so I quickly searched up a phone number. I sat in the cab, shivering from the freezing wind, waiting for what felt like forever for the tow truck to come. I tried to keep warm with the blankets, but it wasn't much help. It seemed like the snowfall only got heavier and the wind got colder. I had been in this situation before, once, but it hadn't felt as bad as this time. I switched the radio on once more, but this time, I heard something besides static. It sounded like a voice, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I cursed under my breath, frustrated and annoyed at the entirety of the situation. It was only then, in the painfully bright moonlight, that I noticed something in the trees next to me. I thought I saw something moving, but I couldn't make out what it was, as it was nearly impossible to see with the snow whirling around. Whoever it was seemed to be holding something to their face. I was pretty startled by this, not expecting to see someone emerge out of the woods, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. I had no idea what to make of it, so I cracked the door open and said, "Hey, you alright?" The person gave no response, which was instantly a red flag. I called again, but to the same effect. I closed the door and shuddered, as I started feeling more and more panicked. Suddenly, the person started walking towards my truck. I could now make out that it looked like a fully grown man. As soon as he reached the tree line, he stopped moving. Now that he was just feet away, I was able to see that the object he was holding was a walkie-talkie. As soon as he put it to his face, I realized that he'd been causing the static noise all along. The strong gusts of wind were blowing into the microphone, causing the sound I thought to be static. That's when the noise turned into something that still freaks me out thinking about today. The guy started laughing over the radio. It wasn't a normal laugh though. It sounded manic. That's when I realized that my life very well could be in danger, and I had no way of escaping. In a panic, I stumbled to the back of the cab and ripped open my toolkit, where I grabbed a small wrench. It wasn't much of a help, but if it came down to it, it was better than nothing. I pulled back the curtain and sat in the back of the cab, only preparing to come out if I heard him trying to get in. I reached for my phone to call the police. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my phone died. Since my truck wouldn't start, I had no way of recharging it. A feeling of dread washed over me, realizing that my only hope was the tow truck driver, who may not even arrive for another hour. I was reminded that I left the CB radio on in the front when I heard the manic laughing start up again. It was non-stop, and every passing second felt like torture. Suddenly, after what felt like forever, it stopped. 1 minute went by, then 2, and I finally started feeling a little bit relieved, thinking that the man left. That all changed when I heard the door handle to the cab wiggling around. Sweat immediately formed on my forehead, despite the freezing temperature, and the adrenaline started hitting me, realizing that I may be seconds away from fighting for my life. Then the sound stopped, which was shortly followed by a loud bang. It sounded like he was kicking the door, and I knew that the lock wouldn't hold if he tried long enough. That's when I heard it. It was the sound of a vehicle. I was on my feet in an instant. I pulled back the curtain and made my way towards the front of the cab, hoping to see the tow truck, and thankfully, it was. As soon as the man saw him, he took off into the woods running. Not caring about the fierce winds and the snow torturing my eyes and skin, I got out of the cab and ran straight towards the tow truck. I was relieved beyond words. I thanked him as I jumped into the truck. I was finally being saved from the situation where I thought I was going to die. Well, we both made it out safe. It turns out, the man in the woods was beating my cab with a stone. He had bashed the door handle multiple times, and the mechanic said that he was probably one blow away from breaking the lock. It truly was the most terrifying and gut-wrenching night of my life, and if that tow truck company never answered when I called, there's a good chance I wouldn't be telling this story today.